Welcome back. This is part 3 on the Synagogue of Satan. Before I start, I just want to mention that I do have some references on what's being presented in the videos. So if you'd like, just leave a request in the comments section and I'll see if I have any sources for whatever you want. So now going back to the Greek empires, Alexander the Great had divided up his empire among his generals, and there was a struggle between two main empires, the Ptolemaic, which would be Egypt, and the Seleucid, which would be called Syria. There was a struggle between Egypt and Syria for Palestine, and it seems that if you could control that region, you could control the rest of the world. And Israel really felt affliction from this struggle. As this struggle went on, there arose several factions. There was a pro-Syria faction and a pro-Egypt faction, and there were also rising nationalist factions in Israel. They were able to keep Egypt and Syria at bay for many years, but it finally got really bad under the Syrian ruler Antiochus IV. He was increasing his influence over Israel, even taking control over Jerusalem and the temple, and he was basically giving the high priesthood in the temple to the highest bidder. So you had anybody that had the money and power, they could make themselves high priest. And this was going against the laws of Israel. You were supposed to have a priest that was from the bloodline of the priest, which would be the bloodline of Aaron or Levi. But the high priesthood was being taken by people from the tribe of Benjamin, and this would be a big cause for contention in Israel. The tribe of Benjamin owned the land upon which Jerusalem was built, but they had no rights to the priesthood according to the Israelite laws. And Antiochus complicated things by deposing several high priests, and this began what's known as the Maccabean Revolt. This was led by the family of the Maccabees. The name Maccabee just means hammer, and their real name, according to Josephus, was Heshmon or Hashmon, and they gave rise to the Hasmonaean dynasty from that name. It's not actually certain what tribe of Israel the Maccabees came from. It's believed that they were from the tribe of Benjamin. The Maccabees led a resistance against the Hellenizers, that would be those in favor of Greek culture, and this would be either Jews or Syrians. Things really came to a head in 171 BC when Antiochus deposed the high priest Onias III, and he also stopped the priestly service of the Zaddokites. The Maccabees increased their resistance, but the Hellenizers also increased pressure, and the Maccabees were eventually driven to the wilderness where they began a guerrilla war. There was a faction called the Hasidians. These were in favor of the law and restoring the priesthood. The word Hasidian meant pious or loyal. They weren't really supporting the Maccabees until what looks like a mistake by Antiochus. His general Bacchides had promised the Hasidians that he would restore the temple services to the rightful priests, but he went back on his promise and he actually murdered several leaders of the Hasidians. The Maccabees were able to defeat the Syrians several times, usually by guerrilla warfare, but Antiochus and the Syrians were actually distracted by the Parthians to their east, and Antiochus had also waged war in Egypt, but he was actually driven back by the Roman Republic, who had sent ships there. Antiochus went back through Israel in a rage, and he seemed to take revenge on the Jews and the temple. He desecrated the temple worship, and he also paganized it. He was finally defeated so that the temple worship was restored according to Jewish law, and the temple was rededicated in 165 BC. But the Hasidians split with the Maccabees. The Maccabees were nationalists, but the Hasidians were not. The Zaddokites also split with the Maccabees because they were not given back their rightful service in the temple. The Zaddokites became known as Sadducees. The name Sadducee is just a corruption of the name Zaddokite, and most of the Hasidians became known as Pharisees. Pharisee was a word for a separatist or an interpreter, and that was from the Hebrew word parash. The Maccabees rose to power using divisions in Syria, and they were also helped by the Parthians. They had even gone to the Spartans for help and requested help even from the Roman Republic. Judas of the Maccabees was also able to subdue the Edomites in this struggle. They had taken over the southern half of Judea from their homeland in Edom. They had been part of the Assyrian Empire and also the Babylonian Empire, and they had come under the control of the Arabs, and they were always at war with the Israelites. In 153 BC, Jonathan of the Maccabees was appointed high priest by Alexander Ballas of the Syrians, and Jonathan was then appointed civil and military governor of Judea in 150 BC, and this began the Hasmonaean dynasty of the Maccabees. And though it started with a lot of good intentions, the Hasmonaean dynasty fell into a long, slow, painful decline of intrigue, corruption, and control by outside powers. The Maccabean high priest Jonathan was opposed by a lot of Jews, especially the Essenes, who he persecuted, and he even tried to destroy their main community at Qumran on the Dead Sea. The Essenes aren't mentioned in the Bible, but they're mentioned in several sources, especially the writings of the historian Josephus, and it's not absolutely certain just what the Essenes believed or what their community was about. They included other sects like the Pharisees and Sadducees. The Sadducees were made up mostly from the wealthier classes and aristocracy and elite of Jerusalem, and many of them had joined with the Essenes when they lost their temple duties. There were different communities of Essenes, and they had different beliefs and practices, so there was no one order of Essenes. Some of them had people from all classes. They had priests and non-priests, and they even had what looks like trade guilds. But when you look closely at the Essenes, you can really see what looks like the cult of Mithra, or the priests of Marduk. Just to look at the origin of the name Essene makes you wonder. The word Essene comes from the Greek essenoi, but the derivation of that word is not certain. The best guesses are it comes from the Aramaic asaya, and that means either pious or to heal. And another possible origin is the Greek word essenos, which means priests of Artemis. So why would a supposedly Jewish sect be called the priests of Artemis, who was just a Greek form of the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, who was also the wife of Marduk? Or why would they be called healers? What did they have to do with healing? They didn't call themselves by the name Essene, and they weren't all involved in the same practices, but there were groups among the Essenes that were not what they appeared to be, and the writings of Josephus and others might reveal just who they really were. Here are some things reported about the Essenes. They called themselves Sons of Light. Is that the Illuminati? Also the Great White Brotherhood. They prayed toward the sun and not the temple. The Jews were supposed to pray toward the temple. So were the Essenes sun worshippers, and the cult of Mithra were also sun worshippers. They held things in common. They looked down on wealth as a corrupting influence, but many of them were from the wealthy classes. Did they really give up their wealth? And they practiced healing arts and kept trade secrets on medicinal healing arts. And they also kept occult knowledge. What kind of occult knowledge is that? And they believed in the immortality of the soul. They believed in fate or predestination. They were known to keep secret names of angels. Was that angels? Was that also fallen angels, demons? They were known to wear white robes, and they were known to be often celibate, and also they were known to be ascetic. In the Essenes, along with the trade guilds, there were also many military orders and martial professions and soldiers, and the cult of Mithra was known to be popular, especially with soldiers. And a lot of Edomites were soldiers and military officers. According to Josephus, many Edomites were conscripted into the Syrian army, and you might wonder, with their endless hatred of Israel, they might have seen an opportunity as soldiers to take revenge. Even some of the officers and generals in the Syrian army might have actually been Edomites, like General Bacchides, who murdered several Jewish Hasidians. And this may be why John Hyrcanus I, the Hasmonaean ruler, actually compelled many Edomites to convert to the Jewish religion. Since so many were in the military, he might have been seeking allies among the Edomites. John Hyrcanus I died in 105 BC, and the Hasmonaean dynasty went into further decline. The family was making intermarriages that brought in corruption and further infiltration. The upper classes of Jerusalem, including the priestly families, were also in decline, and they were corrupted by intermarriages with outsiders and toleration of the mystery religions. The Pharisees were growing and gaining political power. They were made up mostly from the lower classes and Edomites that had converted to the Jewish religion. There was a fight for control of the Sanhedrin, the highest court and council in the land. It was made up of about 70 elders and controlled mostly by the upper classes and Sadducees. There were some Pharisees in the council, but Queen Alexandra Salome helped the Pharisees to take over control of the Sanhedrin in 76 BC. So you can see that Jerusalem and Judea were upside down. The high priest and other priests were not from the lawful families. The rulers were from the tribe of Benjamin when they should have been from the tribe of Judah and the house of David. The Edomites were gaining power and even getting into the priesthood and positions in the Sanhedrin. and other nations were taking more and more control. The cult of Mithra was spreading its influence throughout Palestine as elsewhere, and the Roman Republic was on the rise and was able to use the divisions, strife, and weakness in Israel to control it. And it's very interesting that Pergamum, which was also a center of the cult of Mithra, was bequeathed by its last king, Attalus III, to the Roman Republic in 133 BC. I'll continue in the next part with the further decline of Jerusalem and the rise of the Roman Empire, and also the rise of the Edomite Herods and the situation at the time of Jesus. Peace out.